Hello, welcome to the special live show tonight on Twin Flicks because tonight I have a special guest, and that is director of In Search of Darkness documentaries and In Search of Tomorrow. David Weiner is joining us tonight.
Hey,
Hey, David, thanks for coming on.
happy to be here.
Originally, I know we were supposed to have Harry Marks from Let's All Go to Lobby come on, but he's not feeling very well, so I told him I don't want to catch what you have. So
Feel better. Feel
yeah,
better. Sorry about that.
yeah, he'll definitely feel better. Yeah, so I just thought, and guys, in the if you're in the chat, definitely send in your questions, comments. If you have any questions for David, as far as his documentaries or filmmaking or whatever other questions you have, that's within reason. Send them into send them into the comments, and we'll get to them. So yeah, so I thought, you know, creator is it Creator VC, correct? Is the
Hmm.
company. So I'm just curious, how did you get in with them, and how did this whole journey start with these documentaries?
Well, the documentaries that I make, I'll do the 30-second breakdown of the In Search of Darkness documentaries. They're long form documentaries that cover a decade. And so we've done them we started with one for action movies. Then we did 80s horror, 80s sci fi, and now we're into the 90s. Creator VC is a company formed by Robin Block, who executive produces and masterminds all of these things. And he brought me in. Um, uh, it's always hard to keep it a short story, but ultimately my background is all entertainment journalism, running Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine as the executive editor slash editor in chief, kind of the same thing. And I'm a monster kid through and through. And the stars ultimately kind of aligned when Jessica Dwyer, a fellow journalist, who I had worked with and had written some stuff for Famous Monsters, she became a producer on In Search of Darkness and said, "You got to get involved in this some way, shape, or form." I connected with Robin. I thought the project was amazing. I did not expect to be writing it and directing it and
Oh,
producing as well. But it turned out to just be a serendipitous thing, and I got my long hoped for opportunity to make a movie. And what really enabled this whole series, in a nutshell, is the fans and the backers, because this ultimately got made. It was kickstarted, funded very quickly. Then we did Indiegogo. We made it, we distributed it, manufactured and distributed it ourselves, and it also went on Shutter. And so we found a sizable audience as well as a very loyal audience who loves physical media. And that was in 2019. Cut to, I'm now making my sixth documentary for Robin Block and for Creator VC. I'm very fortunate to be able to do so. We did the first half of In Search of Darkness 90s. This is probably flipped, right? I don't know. But,
actually, no, it's good. Yeah,
oh, okay. We did, 1990 to 1994, just put it out on
got the
Blu-ray.
I got the poster up
And
there too.
awesome. And so now, hey, that's not entirely the full decade, is it? So we
Yeah,
don't want to leave people hanging. So I'm starting production as we speak on In Search of Darkness 1995 to 1999.
that's awesome. Yeah, I love these documentaries. What I love too about them is you guys are not shy about the runtime at all. I mean,
They're a little short, aren't they?
they're way too short, man. Yeah, I love it because I think the first one was a little more like 3 hours and 30 minutes, somewhere around there,
Four,
and then
four, 4 hours. I'm sorry, I'm going to step in and I'll just help
four
you there.
hours.
First one was like 4 hours and 15 minutes
Okay,
with credits. The second one got to about 4.5 hours, and then I went a little crazy. Robin was not entirely pleased, but the audience was, and I got to do over 5 hours for part three. And I got to sort of run with the ball again. And for In Search of Darkness 9094, that's with credits, 6 hours long.
yeah, yeah, 6 hours. I mean, it's great because us fans and I've watched other documentaries, so like an hour and a half, 90 minutes, an hour and a half, under 2 hours, and you're always wanting more. Oh, come on, give us more here. And what's great about having that runtime is that you actually talk about everything that us fans want to know about. And that's because you are a fan too of the horror genre.
Oh yeah.
And so it's great. I mean, I've talked to Robin via email a couple times and on social media. I think it was X or Twitter, and he's a great guy. First of all, awesome guy. He's hooked me up on getting me the review links to
Oh,
all
good.
the In Search of Darknesses, and I think we had you on maybe 2 years ago. It's been
Yes.
where you talked
I can't
about.
remember if it was for In Search of Tomorrow or
Yeah,
was
it
it
was for In
Darkness?
Search of Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, it's just some great documentaries, and I said this in our last time I talked to you, that I love the whole layout of the documentary, where it has the wall of the artwork, the key art of each movie, and then you zoom into that movie you're going to talk about. Sometimes there's two movies. I'm like, oh, which one is it going to be? Which one is it going to be? I hope it's this one. But then you zoom on the other one. I'm like, ah, man. but but still, you do end up getting to it, even if it's on part two or part three. And I think it was part three. You talked more about movies that the horror movie genre that's more not in the mainstream.
Yes, but a little more straight to video, a little more sort of the dusty bottom shelf that only the true fans, when they were in the video store and they'd go by that one shelf that was sun bleached that
Yeah,
most people ignored. The horror fans knew about that one and they'd seek those out.
right.
We definitely got around to those by part three, which was really cool.
Yeah, that's what I love too, is because it's not the movies that Blockbuster or Hollywood Video would rent. It's the ones that your mom and Paul video stores had.
Yeah.
And I remember growing up in Oregon, Hillsboro, Oregon, and there was a Take Two video and a Star Video, and those are the ones that we went to get those movies because we knew they would have them. And your mainstream audiences, like you said, they look at these and think, oh, this is lowbrow. This is why do I want to watch this? And then so we always knew they were going to be in stock with those type of movies. And I think the first one we rented was Evil Dead back
Uh-huh.
in the late 80s, 89 or 90. And when we rented them, I still remember today, the cashier said, "Are you sure you want to rent this? Because it's not exactly a theatrical film. Are you sure you want to rent this?" And me and my twin brother, we watched it. We loved it. Fell in love with it. And then we rented part two, and then of course Army of Darkness. And that's kind of what started our love for horror.
Hmm.
And mainly because at that young age we were 13, 14, somewhere around there, and
Mhm.
we that's when we actually started getting into filmmaking. And we didn't realize it at the time of how these movies were made, and we actually learned by watching horror movies like Evil Dead, because you really saw how they got in there in the dirt and really invented ways on how to capture the movie and the scenes. I mean, putting the camera on a 2x4 and then having two guys on each end run with the board with the
Right,
camera in the middle of it.
the shaky cam,
I
right?
mean,
Because they
yeah,
can't afford a steady
right.
cam. That's their budget for the entire movie right there.
Exactly. And then there was another one. I forgot what it was, but I remember in a making of or commentary where they said that they had all they had was a wheelchair. So
Yep.
they had the guy hold the camera and now the guy would push him in a wheelchair. And that's what me and Simon used to do, because we had a wheelchair in our house. So we would do that with a wheelchair, make our little home movies, and it works. I mean, it can still work today too. You don't have to have all this expensive equipment to make
No, you
movies.
just need you need creativity. You need to believe in your story, and you need to just be resourceful. But ultimately, a thing that I really enjoy doing as a film school grad kid myself, I was really into movies as a kid. But then once Star Wars, American Werewolf, films that made me say, "Huh, how did they make it? How did they
Yeah.
do that?" It made me start thinking about how the filmmaking process went. Now that I get to do these documentaries, it's very important for me to have a little bit of film school 101 for the people who are interested in that or would love to do it themselves, you know?
Exactly. And I know a couple of my friends that were inspired by your documentaries
Mm.
to make their own documentary. And it wasn't about horror, it was about other things, but still they were, and I would talk to them. I'd say, you know what, just go out and do it. It doesn't have to be expensive equipment. Just go out and do it. And even if it turns out like crap, at least you did it and you learned from what you're doing. That's the main
Don't
thing.
don't wait for permission.
Right.
You gotta take the initiative.
Right. And now today we have the camera right here, our phones, you know,
Exactly.
and so that's what I say is even if it doesn't turn out good, even if you don't like it, at least you learned something from what your experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yes, and as Simon and I got older and older, we started learning more and more about filmmaking. That, and I also learned, and I've told people that a lot of times directors that you see today, these big A-list directors, their start was in horror.
Hmm.
Steven Spielberg, his first movie was Duel. That was a horror movie. Jaws, a horror movie. And so it's either horror or pornography.
Exactly.
I, I,
That's the William Lustig story. You got to hear his story.
yeah, I've tried to get him on the show, but they're
Keep trying.
yeah well, when I asked someone who works with him before, they're like, well, it costs this much for this amount of time. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh man, but yeah, I'm always trying to get others on, but yeah, I mean, horror. What I loved about horror, and like what we talked about, is that it is more inventive than your average mainstream movie because you don't have a budget. You're more creative. You use what you have, and you're creative with it, which is, I mean, I'm sure you would agree, which is sorely lacking from horror movies made today.
Well, yeah. In general, it depends what you're looking at, of course. I think what's interesting about making movies, whether you're a resourceful person with no budget or a large company trying to make something that will resonate with fans and the box office at the same time, is the more cooks in the kitchen, the more generic it's going to get. The more money that you put into it, the more you have to hedge your bets because you're spending huge amounts of money as an investment to get your investment back. So potentially it could water things down. But there's some
Yeah.
great things out there. I mean,
Yeah.
we're kind of in a renaissance now of amazing, whether it's on Shutter, whether it's in streaming, whether it's on video, or whether it's in theatrical. We're getting a lot of good stuff. But I think you can't beat the respect for the ingenuity and the gumption of backyard filmmakers making their dreams come true, and in stumbling and trying again, or finding an audience. You look at Robert Rodriguez. He had to give blood to get money to do El Mariachi. But look what it did for him now. We all know who he is today.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, when he made that film, he made it on what, 7,000?
Yeah,
$7,000.
7,000 shot on what, 8
It,
millimeter or 6
yeah.
millimeter. I
It
can't
was eight.
remember, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And then when it was sold, I think it was Lionsgate that bought it, or Artisan. Uh, they pumped more money into it to make it more appealing theatrically, but still, he made that movie on 7 grand. And like we just talked about today, you have your phone with you, have a camera right there in your pocket. And today's technology, you can make a low budget, shoestring budget look like a more mainstream film, like you actually spent money on this. Um, One thing that Simon and I used to do, we used to, when we were taking our dad's mini DV camera, and we would, make little short films. Instead of just point and shoot, we would try to find out different angles. So we had
Hmm.
one camera, we would shoot here, then we would go, up here in the corner, we would go down low, we would do all these different types of shots, and it made it look like we had more than one camera.
Make it
And,
interesting. Yeah.
exactly. And I remember a couple friends were like, "You did this with one camera? That's
Hmm.
crazy." And so it's kind of like I remember the end of the Fablemans when
Right. Yeah.
yeah, you said make it interesting,
Yeah.
you know.
It's all know where your horizon line is.
Exactly, exactly.
Another thing you have to be, even whether you're on the set for with some money, or you're just doing it, with some pals. Especially if you're doing it with some pals, you have to be like Tom Sawyer. You have to like get your crew together. You have to hoodwink them with
Hmm.
pizza and other goodies, potato chips to get together and make a movie together. I
Well,
think about I forgive me, these guys. I don't know their names. I used to, but there are these two pals who decided they were going to make Raiders of the Lost Ark shot for shot, and
oh,
they
okay,
did that,
yeah,
and it took years, but they were determined to finish, and you could literally see them aging from kids to tweens to teens, and they finally finished it. And guess what? Steven Spielberg heard about it, and he saw it, and he loved it.
yeah.
Talk about a calling card. That's amazing.
Right, right, right. We made a short film, me and Simon, and we sent it to Amblin, and we actually got a letter back from Spielberg, uh, and so that
Nice. Yeah.
yeah, I have it up there, framed and everything, and it, it it just shows that you can make something if you really put enough imagination and gumption into it. And I think Robert Rodriguez said that he would have his whole family as his crew, where his mom was craft services, mom would make the sandwiches and stuff, and that's just keep them happy by feeding
Yeah.
them. Really,
Yes,
is what you need.
is a crew is only as good as how well fed they are.
Right.
I've worked on really low budget movies. When I first came out to Los Angeles, I worked on all sorts of movies, and I remember one really low budget film that I will not name. The craft service, well, sorry, the caterer, not even the craft service. The caterer was so bad that the crew on night two was ready to revolt, including the director. And I remember
Wow.
the director said out loud for all the crew, knowing that we were like all, had indigestion, we're starving because we didn't want to eat, or we're ready to just sort of throw in the towel. He said out loud, if these caterers are here tomorrow, the movie's over. We're not going to shoot anymore.
Wow.
Listen, if you get your director saying that, A, they're on the side of the crew, and B, he knows where his bread is buttered, literally and figuratively, right?
Right, right, exactly, exactly. What I was curious too is with your In Search of Darkness movies, and then as we talked about, you worked on In Search of Tomorrow. Was that always planned? Number one, well, actually, number one was In Search of Darkness always planned to be a trilogy, and then you were going to make In Search of Tomorrow, or was it supposed to originally be a standalone documentary?
It
What
was
was?
originally because it was crowdfunded. In Search of Darkness was meant to be, let's get this funded and made movie. There was no plans for more. As I was making it, given the structure where you're going 1980 to 1989, you can only fit so many movies within each year. You needed a topic chapter in between the years for more context. And I knew that we were leaving a lot on the table, that
Mhm.
I hoped at one point I would be able to get to some. Not, it's hundreds and hundreds of movies that came out in the
Oh,
80s. You
yeah,
still We still, over 3 movies and 14 hours, have not hit all the movies. There's
right.
plenty that we haven't talked about. That's why you've got that wall of posters, because at least I could say, well, look, you could see it exists, and if we can't get to it, you could seek it out yourself. Or
Yeah.
if you're crafty, you just watch the end credits, because I list every poster and every clip. That, so if we don't do a segment on a movie, you could at least see what we were thinking about and referencing and trying to show people. But we were fortunate enough to have a very, very warm and welcoming response from the horror community, which gave us permission, to do part two. And after we
Yeah.
did In Search of Darkness part two, I had no intention of doing part three. I didn't think
Mm.
people would want more. I figured like, all right, we did two on the 80s. They're probably going to want another decade. And at that point, that's when Robin started talking about In Search of Tomorrow. He was already thinking about sci-fi. He was thinking 80s sci-fi using the same format as In Search of Darkness. So I'll show you the.
Yeah, I got the
Oop,
poster up there.
there you go. I was going to say there's the Star Trek poster behind me. If you look at Star Trek: The Next Generation poster behind me,
Okay.
I remember I used to have conversations with Robin. We'd meet. He's in the UK. I'm in Los Angeles, and he'd be like, "I could tell that you're a sci-fi fan." And I'm like, How can you tell?" He's like, "Well, you got a Star Trek post. Original post one sheet over your shoulder there."
Nice.
And how'd you like to do a sci-fi version of In Search of Darkness? And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the gift that keeps on giving,
Right.
And anyway, so I got to make In Search of Tomorrow. But people wanted more 80s horror. The horror community is very loud in a good way. They really let their desires known and their demand for more if they do want it, and they vote with their dollar to crowdfund these things. So yeah, we did part three, and arguably we could have kept going in the 80s because there's
Yeah.
still so many more. But the 90s beckoned, and so now we decided to do it a little differently. We divided it into two parts. So we did In Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994. That's out now. And then we're going to complete the decade with a second movie, 95 to 99.
Okay, that was my next question is where you're going to have a trilogy. Because that's what I was wondering because I noticed, like you said, 1990, 94, and then 95. And I'm thinking, okay, so you're going to end at 98 and
99.
then go to 99. And the third
Well,
one, what's he going to do?
all the In
So,
Search of Darkness 80s ones, they go to 80 to 89.
yeah.
And In Search of Tomorrow, 80 to 89, because that's essentially the decade. Because as soon as you're in 1990, you're in the 90s, arguably, right?
Yeah.
These are arbitrary lines that we have to draw. I mean, we could have an 11-year decade and, do 80 to 90, I suppose. But listen, we have a budget. We only can, we want to get these things done. And it takes a lot of we turn these movies around in a year, not including the development of it.
Hmm.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And so, doing 11 years instead of 10
Yeah. Yeah.
is it might be the straw that breaks the camel's back, at least
Yeah,
for
you gotta have your limits somewhere.
yeah.
What's great too is I don't now are they still having the flash sale with
Yeah,
the
yeah, we're
trilogy?
currently doing a flash sale where you can get yeah, thanks for putting that up. You can
Yeah.
get the 80s trilogy in one case. You can get In Search of Darkness 1990 to 1994. We're also selling the Aliens Expanded documentary that Ian Nathan directed. I was an executive producer on that, and that's really great. That's a 4-hour documentary with pinch
Yeah.
me. We got James Cameron and Sigourney Weaver,
Right.
and pretty much everyone who's living is connected to aliens in there. And
Yeah,
we're also
Robin actually sent me that documentary. It's a great documentary. I mean,
it's
they're doing Creator VC's doing great work there.
and we're doing one for The Thing currently as well. So Ian Nathan is directing that. It's called The Thing Expanded, the same sort of format where you take, instead of a decade, now you take one amazing movie and you extract it and you dissect it and you put it
Yeah.
under the microscope and you discuss it. But I was going to say the sale also, there's a companion book for In Search of Tomorrow that we did. I was the executive editor on that. Abby Bernstein wrote it, Creator VC made it and published it. That came out this past year. And if you go to 80sscifibook.com, you can get that as well. And that's on sale. So we're kind of doing a big sort of late winter flash sale till the end of February. And,
Okay.
keep on checking our socials. You never know where we're going to put this stuff on sale again.
Yeah, a friend of mine today when he heard that I was having you on and he immediately messaged me. He's like, I love these documentaries, and he said I think you had a flash sale back in October, I believe.
Yeah,
And
October was actually the sale for the final pre-order for In Search of Darkness 90 and 94.
okay, yeah. He said he went and bought them all, and he said favorite. He said is his favorite documentaries he has seen,
Oh, awesome.
and he's a big documentary guy. So, yeah, and I agree with him 100%. In fact, I've watched them all probably more than a couple times.
Oh, wow.
I love the interviews and how you construct the whole the whole movie, the documentary, and how you do the interview. It's not just boring talking heads, which a lot of documentaries turn out to be. It's interesting, and then you have people like Joe Bob Briggs on there. You have the directors on there of the films, the producers, the writers. Then you have some like Dead Meat. The guys from Dead Meat is on
Uh-huh.
there,
Uh-huh.
and some other guys, social media or social personalities are on there. And it's really cool that you do have a blend of that, because you have a blend of fans and then you have the blend with the filmmakers.
Yep.
And it's a really good combination there, that you're not just hearing from the filmmakers, but you're hearing from the fan perspective as well.
What's really fun is that you get people like John Carpenter, Heather Langenkamp, Barbara Crampton, Tom Savini, not only talking about their projects and how they made them and their triumphs and tragedies, getting them across the line, but they also talk about, as film fans, some of their favorites and why. And that to
Yeah.
me makes it like a hangout. It's like it's a big celebration of the decade and of the genre, but it's also like hanging out with these guys at the bar. The bar's closed, but you got to stay at the table with these guys to
Yeah.
talk until 4 a.m, which is super cool. And I want to make sure to give a shout out to the editors who put these together. So Samuel Way did In Search of Darkness 1 to 3, and he did In Search of Tomorrow. He also did Aliens Expanded, and he's working on The Thing Expanded. Because Samuel's been working on Aliens Expanded, we brought on Alex Townley to do the In Search of Darkness 90s. And these guys are absolutely superb. They're very intuitive with their pacing and the shot choice and everything from the sound mix and the color timing. And it's such a huge, I mean, I'm not going to go down ad nauseum with what it takes to make these things, but it's a huge amount of work.
Oh, yeah.
And the editing process is a huge process. Everything from me, writing the outline, doing the questions, sitting down, doing the interviews, and then taking the interviews and scripting all the segments and the chapters, and then whittling those down, finding all the clips, getting the music. We got original music. Weary Pines did the original trilogy, and they did In Search of Tomorrow, and Dream Invaders, a new group that we've brought on for In Search of Darkness 90s, are absolutely fantastic. And so posters and marketing, all the stuff, I get to have my fingers in all these pies. And it's a lot of work, but from a creative standpoint, I'm an absolute kid in the candy store because I love this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Very fulfilling work. Yeah. I was just going to ask you about the editing process. How involved are you in the editing?
Well, I don't do the actual editing. So what we
Yeah.
do is, my editors are in the UK, and I'm in Los Angeles. So Alex Townley is he's in London or near London. He's like in the outskirts of London. And what we do is I'll write a script. There's, everything is like I stop and I go on a tangent. It's because it's cart before the horse with half of these things. But I'll give him all the movies that I think I'm going to do. But oftentimes when I'm talking with an interview and they bring up some movie or a reference, I'm like, oh yeah, I got to include that because then we can go down that little tangent and rabbit hole. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, we'll try and pre-vet all the movies that we're going to be doing best we can, 90% or so. 10% is wild card. Who knows what we're going to end up with. And after I do these interviews, I transcribe them from a transcription program that I use, where I could literally take all the time codes and the best bites. And what I do is I put them all together in what seems to me like a coherent tale talking about, say, Evil Dead 2 or something like that. Mm-hmm. What I do is then I use the 8-hour difference that we have between Los Angeles and London. to our advantage. And what I'll do is I'm done for the day. I send off my scripts. I wake up in the morning. I get the strung together bites, first thing in the morning, and I can listen to them. And it's not like, well, you just pick the time codes, you get the bites, and you're done. There's all sorts of things where, like, well, it looked good on paper, but it doesn't seem natural with the delivery. Or this seemed like it was absolutely important, but now it's a little repetitive, redundant, or too much, or a running time is, I'm going to have to kill babies, I just know, and take out a good chunk of an anecdote just to keep things moving. But once I'm satisfied with what the foundation is for a segment or for a chapter, then I'll give it back to Alex, and I'll usually have a couple notes. Make sure you put this clip here and this clip here and this poster and this image. But for the most part, I want to see what he's going to bring to the table. Intuitively, he's going to try and build the story of the movie while they're talking about it. And it's got to have a linear feel where it makes sense. And he'll give that to me, and I'll look at the rough cut of the segment. Tell me when you're bored, because
this is interesting to me. I love this stuff. I do.
But then we'll look at the segment, and then I'll be like, all right, this is really cool. Okay, this completely doesn't work. Now I know that it's a bit Swiss cheese here. We got to fill in with a little more information here. Here's the clips that really make sense. Where within our time frame, this is making sense now. And I'll put that in sort of the conveyor belt of everything we're doing for a 5.5 hour, 6 hour runtime. We usually run over too. I usually am, 6.5, 7 hours, and there's always stuff that ends up on the cutting room floor, and I have to kill entire segments because at the end of the day, the Blu-ray only holds so much. So I'll stop there, but that's kind of a taste of the basic fundamental process of putting the jigsaw puzzle together.
Well, I'm surprised that you've turned this around in a year, because I mean, I'm an editor myself, and trying to edit just an hour and a half movie can take a lot of time, and so I can't imagine editing a full 4, 5, 6 hour documentary. I mean, it's a lot of work. People don't understand how much work actually really goes into just editing alone. I mean, and then all the post work that has to be done, and then, like you said, putting it in a way that makes sense too, because it's easy for that not to happen. Honestly, it can be easy for that not to happen, and especially if you're making a documentary. And
I could interject by just saying is, what makes it a little more manageable is because we're doing it in these segments, whether it's a movie segment or whether it's a chapter. You're only doing something that's anywhere between 2 or 3 minutes to 5 or 6 minutes, and then a chapter can then be anywhere from 6 minutes to 10 or 12 minutes. But there's an end. And so you're putting these chunks together, but what ultimately happens is when you put this whole rough cut together and you see how it all flows, that's when you start really sort of taking a hammer to things and polishing corners and adding things and subtracting things and saying, well, wait, this now in context doesn't make sense. This is now redundant because they talked about it earlier, and 25 minutes later, it's as if we're talking about it like it didn't happen. So now I have to choose one or the other places to introduce and definitively talk about this, whatever topic or idea is. But when you're putting it all together, you have the big picture, and that's when you can really sort of sand it down and make it shiny.
Right, exactly. With the interviews, I think we talked about it last time you were on. But is there an interview? I mean, so as an entertainment reporter, you've done junkets and everything. So you're used to interviewing filmmakers and celebrities and so on. But is there an interview that just either the person you're interviewing just wasn't really in on it, or just didn't really get what you wanted, and that you just had to scrap an interview?
No, I've never had to scrap an interview.
Okay.
But there are certain personalities. I'm thinking of one very well-known person that we all know and we all love, and we love this person's work. Uh, and I realized that it was like I had to grab the bull by the horns, but they wanted to run the interview.
Mm.
Normally I sort of set the tone. It's very casual. You could start and stop again. So if you stutter or you're not sure of something, I
Hmm.
could say, oh yeah, let's look up. That was the year it came this year.
Right.
99% of the stuff is organic coming out of everyone's mouth. But I'm also here to make everyone look great. And if someone's like, oh gosh, I can't remember this one thing, or well, let me say that again. I'm cherry picking the best stuff to make them look great, and so on. But this one person uh, immediately just started saying, "I don't want to talk about this," and then talking about something else. But it wasn't like a question that was an offensive question. They just
Hmm.
decided they wanted to talk about an entirely different thing. But then, ironically, they started talking about the thing that they weren't going to talk about once they got comfortable talking about the other thing.
Yeah.
So sometimes you just sort of have to run with it and see where it goes. But for the most part, the interviews that we've done in the hundreds now for In Search of Darkness and In Search of Tomorrow and Aliens expanded and now the thing expanded. Everyone is coming to us because we invited them to sit down. So they either come to our studio or we come to their home or their office, and they are there for us. And so there's no gotcha moments. There's no, I'm at a junket or a convention or, I'll make some quick time for these people. You
Yeah.
get their full attention and you get them warmed up and then going down memory lane, and then you get some really good stories. And so, yeah.
Yeah, we've done a lot of interviews on this channel, and going back to what you were saying about the one person that was kind of didn't want to talk about what you asked him, but instead went on something else. I'm going to say his name, Nicholas Meyer. I had an interview with Nicholas Meyer.
Uh-huh.
And he did not want. I mean, I told him ahead of time. We told him this is a movie channel. We talk about movies here. We're big Star Trek fans. People are watching this, are interested in Star Trek, and so he was well aware of what we were going to talk about.
Uh-huh.
But every time I asked him questions about Star Trek 2, he would always he didn't want to talk about it. You can tell he did not want to talk about it, which on one hand I can understand because he probably asked these questions every single day from 1982
Right, right.
onward,
It can be psychological torture for these folks.
Right. And so I'm sure you do the same thing. I kind of go look at other interviews that they've done, so I'm not repeating the same questions that they are asked time and time and time again. But then you have some fans that if you don't ask a question, they're like, well, I wanted to know about this. Why didn't you ask them? So, but it was the same type of deal where he wanted. I started getting the feeling he wanted to talk more about his books that he wrote
Sherlock Holmes. Yep.
rather than the movies.
Right.
And so that's what I got into more was I was like, oh, okay, obviously he wants to talk about his books, so let's get into the books. So that's we talked about the books, and then after that he warmed up and was comfortable enough to talk about Star Trek.
Well, there you go. So yeah, you weren't. Sometimes you got to buy them dinner on the
Right.
date. Or you got to buy them a drink to loosen up first. I understand that completely, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the right way of going about it. The thing is, you as an interviewer, you can't always direct the line of questioning to go the way you want it. Ultimately, if you have an answer in mind for a question, you can ask your question, but if you don't get your answer, you either move on to the next question or you kind of come around about in a different way and you ultimately get your stuff. That
Mm-hmm.
situation was like that one person I was talking about where I was in my back of my mind. I'm like, I know we'll come back to this
Yeah.
once he gets a sense of how this is going and that he doesn't have to control the room,
Mm-hmm.
then we'll be good. We'll be good.
Yeah.
I'll just say another one who hasn't been in my In Search of Documentaries, but William Shatner. is like that.
Yeah, I've heard stories.
William Shatner is so determined to talk only about what he wants to talk about, which is great if he's talking about the things that you're asking him about. But if he doesn't want to go there, he doesn't want to go there. You know.
Hmm.
But listen, these are human beings. They're not our property. I'm not saying
Right.
that you think that, but they're not our property. If they want to talk about the things that we are hoping they'll talk about, then we're lucky. But they are day in, day out. It's the same stuff, and sometimes it's all about getting the right angle to ask a question about a thing that they've answered a bunch of different times. But if you come at it from a different approach, a different angle, or if you've loosened them up by talking about stuff that they want to talk about, sometimes they just talk about what you want without you even having to ask a question.
Hmm.
And I've done that with Mark Hamill. Mark Hamill. The first time I ever interviewed him was for a movie that he was promoting called Sushi Girl. This little indie film, which was a really good film that people should
Yeah.
check out. Called
Yeah,
Sushi.
it's good. I've seen it.
But of course, this is when I was with Entertainment Tonight, and I of course had to get some Star Wars questions
Hmm.
before the J.J. Abrams trilogy and all that stuff like that. But what I did was I was always kind of proud of my little approach, because I said, with the time that we have left, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about a little 70s movie that you kind of were known for. And he kind of goes, he does this. He's like, okay, no, yeah, sure, go for it. And I said,
Yeah.
so Corvette Summer, I want to know all about it. And he goes, yes, thank you so much. I love Corvette Summer. And he got so excited and his eyes lit up. And we talked about Corvette Summer for 5 minutes. And then I said, if you don't mind, I still want to ask you the Star Wars question. He's like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, of course, of course.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I've done
warmed him
that.
up.
I've done that before, where I go through first of all, before you interview anybody, you have to do research. They will immediately know if you have not done your research
Yes.
immediately, and when they find out, when they get that sniff you out, then they start sabotaging. They will sabotage the interview. And so before anybody I interview, I go through their filmography. If I don't know much about them. And so what I also do too is I pick out movies that, like Corvette Summer, that maybe the general public doesn't know about, but they loved it. And
Yeah,
so,
you pick their deep cuts and they're like,
right.
oh, you know that. You've seen that. Oh.
And
Yeah.
then they're impressed by that, and then they'll go on to other questions. I had a friend who interviewed Richard Dreyfuss, and he was so excited. I mean, he wanted to talk about all of his movies and his legendary film career, blah blah blah, all this. And it turned out that all Richard Dreyfuss wanted to talk about was political things, just the political arena that we were in at that time. And so what he did is, to get around that and back into the movies, he just asked the question: have you ever wanted to make a political drama film or a movie about that? And then that got him back on track with movies, and then he went on from there. And so, yeah, it's just like what you say. You have to, first of all, you got to learn their body language. You have to read their body language. So, like, when people have asked me how to interview somebody, I say, number one, do your research. Number two, make them feel comfortable. If they don't feel comfortable, they're not going to do that.
Yeah, if they feel like they're in a safe space, they'll relax and they'll talk.
Exactly. And the best way to do that is not to dive right into the movies, but ask how their day was. How's it going? How's their family? One thing that I ask people generally when I start an interview is their upbringing. Where they were born. Were they in a family that loved movies? Or, personal questions like that they don't get asked very much of. And that helps calm them, not calm down, but comfort. Put them in
Also,
a comfort
talk
zone.
about food.
Food, yeah.
Everyone eats food. Everyone has favorite foods.
Yeah.
Everyone has likes and dislikes. Talk about food, and they will be like, oh yeah, I had a jelly donut today. It was amazing.
Exactly. We got a couple people here in the chat. Let's see here. High Def Disc News. Hey, thanks for joining us tonight. I can't read it very good. It says Shatner is great, but he seems difficult. Can't say that surprised me a bit.
I have to say though, he will also give a really great interview. I mean,
Hmm.
I've interviewed him a couple times. And he was one of the, I think it might be the first time I spoke with him when I was with Entertainment Tonight. He had a show called Raw Nerve. So the type of stuff that he wanted to talk about was personal stuff, which is stuff that he normally never wants to talk about. But I remember getting some really interesting stuff about him being sort of a father trying to make ends meet
Hmm.
and manage his children and his career and the balance of that, and how fame sort of played into that, and acting, and pursuing his own sort of end goals. It was really kind of interesting. It was very, it was a good interview, and I couldn't believe that I got off that interview
Wow.
with such good stuff. But I remember I also talked to him on the 40th anniversary of Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I am a Star Trek fan ever since the original series. I love the Star Trek.
Yeah.
I ran around with my Remco, utility belt. If people know what I'm talking about, that's my bona fide right there. So here I get to talk to. I'm on the phone with him. I get to talk to William Shatner, and I said, because I was a little distracted at the moment, just getting my notes in order. So I said, and I knew we were there to talk about, and he was there to
Hmm.
talk about. This was for Hollywood Reporter, the 40th anniversary of Star Trek: The Motion Picture. So the first thing I said was, so when you were working on Star Trek: The Next Generation, it just slipped out, and he he says, oh. And I'm like, I mean, oh, did I say that? I meant, of course I meant, and he's like, and he totally took me to task on it, deservedly so, you
So,
know. But I
so in
was
his
just,
and in his mind, he's thinking, "Yeah, right. You're a Star Trek fan.
well,
Yeah,
that's the
sure.
thing is, I quickly had to say, I've been watching Star Trek since I was a kid. It's just a slip of the tongue,
Yeah."
and he was fine after that. But I felt like a moron, especially because I know the difference.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I loved it when you were on Hoth.
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
um, yeah, I mean, interviews can be tricky. I did another interview where again, well, he actually hijacked the interview and started asking me all the questions,
Oh yeah, that's
and
good.
so
That's a Mel Brooks move.
it's good because it also tells them, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. He knows what he's talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and ask his questions. And that's what happened. So sometimes you get ones that will test waters to see how knowledgeable you really are about the career, or are you just, some guy wanting to interview a celebrity and
The
you don't really have any real questions.
the first time I interviewed Mel Brooks, I've got to interview him a couple times, and the first time I interviewed him, he wouldn't let me ask a question, and for 5 minutes he kept on asking me questions, but it wasn't testing me on the subject. He wanted to
Uh-huh.
know where I grew up, why I do what I do, my career goals. I mean, he was just like, he
Sometimes
just
they're
wanted to make
interested. Yeah.
conversation. He
Yeah.
wanted to get to know the guy who's sitting there interviewing him,
Hmm.
and he was eating a bagel, a cream cheese bagel at the time, and he said, "You're going to have to suffer through me chewing on my bagel and cream cheese right here." But yeah, so tell me more. So yeah, anyway,
Yeah.
good stuff.
Yeah.
That to me is really fun because it's more
It's
memorable than just talking about young Frankenstein. That
right.
arguably,
Right.
arguably.
Right. Right. Dean Cunny is another one I was so honored to interview. That was one of my best interviews I did, and I asked him about his feelings of today's AI technology, of how they make the movies compared to how he shot back in the 70s and 80s, and he didn't want to talk about that. He just kind of shut it down.
Hmm.
And so I was like, okay, that's fine, but and that's one thing too is it goes back to body language.
Hmm.
And if somebody doesn't want to talk about something, don't press them to talk about it.
Right, right, right.
Never do that. And I've seen some interviews where people do that, and it's just, you could tell that the person they're interviewing is just fuming under their skin.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
They'll
but
end.
yeah,
They'll end it. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, interviews are a lot of fun, and I'm sure you had a blast.
Well,
Interview-
I've had so many, and I say that in that I feel very fortunate. And
Yeah.
last I'll say, just in general, it's always a good interview when you have a certain allotted time and they give you more. That
Hmm.
means that means they're enjoying what they're
Oh
doing.
yeah.
And I've been able to say everyone from Mel Brooks to James Cameron have given me more time, twice the amount of time, three times the amount of time. And that to me is like my personal, badge of honor that these people actually want to keep talking.
Yeah, that's I've had that happen to myself. Where they usually ask how long the interview would be. I usually say 45 minutes to an hour. They're like, okay, great. Hour comes up, and I'm like, well, we're going to wrap this up. And they're like, well, no, wait. Do you have any more questions? I mean, do you want to
Sure.
talk more? And
Yeah,
I'm
they
like,
they
yeah.
get comfortable, and if they don't have to like run and
I even had
change the
two.
laundry or something.
You're right. I even had two where we got to know each other. He asked questions about me, myself, personal life, and I asked him vice versa. And it got so comfortable that he was like, "Hey, if you're ever back in LA, send me an email and we can meet up." And I was
Oh,
like,
very cool.
it's just yeah, like you said, that's when you got a badge of honor for interviewing, and you know that you're doing something right, and it's a really good feeling.
Phil Tippett asked me to lunch after our interview, and that was
Really,
also very nice.
wow.
He gave me a tour of his production facilities, showed me some stuff that was
Oh, wow.
hadn't even been seen. He's like, "Don't talk about that." But then he's like, "Yeah, come to, want to join us for lunch?" I'm like, "Okay, yeah."
Oh man, that's awesome. That is great. Um, yeah. So since this is a physical media channel show, I'm sure you're a fan of physical media as well, especially
We're
those.
gonna do physical media ASMR.
Yeah. Put it close to the camera. Go, oh yeah. Yeah. I was curious. The boutique labels. What Vinegar Syndrome. I don't know if you've. What are your favorite boutique labels out there that
Yeah, Vinegar
really.
Syndrome, Severin, Scream Factory slash Shout Factory. Any of these small boutique labels that are championing media that has not made the jump. Because streaming every time there's more streaming, physical media forever, says High Def Disc News. Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like this stuff is all going to disappear, and all the stuff that's streaming. When I say, okay, that's a broad generalization, but all the stuff that we are enjoying on streaming currently, whether it's on Disney Plus or Max or Hulu and that kind of stuff like that, Netflix. Um, when these guys sell off their material, they write it off and like it's gone. Like whether it's Willow on Disney Plus. Um, when Prey came out on Hulu, the
Mhm.
Predator prequel,
Yeah.
I was like, please give me physical media because I don't want to have to go to Hulu to watch this
Right.
because it's not going to be on Hulu all the time.
Hmm.
Ironically, now it's on Tubi, and it'll be on Tubi for 5 more minutes, and then who knows where it'll be.
Right.
So
Right.
all these boutique labels that are taking very old films, and when I say very old, pre now, inevitably they'll be old. They're doing a service by preserving this stuff. I mean, there's a whole rabbit hole of film preservation that is very important because everything from film reels that have dissolved over time because they haven't been kept up and the studios don't care. There's our film history is disappearing on a daily basis. And so it doesn't matter what the title is, whether it's the Canadian Things on VHS, or Prey. This stuff, if you have it on your shelf, it's going to last longer. And
Yeah.
I like to say streaming is fleeting, but physical is forever. That's my little saying.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, just the sheer quality alone, the difference in the quality. I actually did a 4K versus streaming comparison, where I actually contacted Fox and told them what I was doing, what my channel is, and if there's any way they can give me an actual file of Prey so I could do a comparison. And they actually sent it to me. I was
Oh,
surprised.
really? Wow.
Yeah, I was surprised. So they sent me a thumb drive. It was 7 gigabytes. The 4K is 100
Hmm.
gigabytes. And then I was looking at the bit rate. It doesn't even compare. There's no comparison. I mean, you're looking at 80 to 112. Actually, I saw it spike to 120 Mbps on the 4K disc. And so the sheer quality alone, it makes physical media that's alone is going to make physical media stand on its own. And I'm seeing more and more people. I think the pandemic really helped in
Hmm.
this because more and more people started realizing, hey, wait a minute, I can't watch what I need to watch, being stuck at home. And so they started getting into physical media, and they're like, wow, this is so much better than streaming. Streaming is great for convenience. And I
I'm
don't have a. Oh, go ahead.
sorry to interrupt you, but I'm one of those. I'm one of those guys who at first did not fully understand the whole concept of films and television shows being licensed. The licenses expire,
Uh
and then
huh.
they disappear off of streaming. And so, I used to think this is. I've learned my lesson, and this is a long time ago. But Netflix, I used to think, oh well, listen, I have so much stuff, I don't have room for it. It's all on Netflix. This is back thinking when Netflix was a video store, and
Mm-hmm.
now you could also get the stuff on streaming, which of course evolved and changed quite a bit. So I sold off a bunch of DVDs and Blu-rays because I'm like, I just don't have the space for them. Some of these I won't come back to that often, so I don't
Yeah.
really need it. And then that one time when I wanted to watch it, it was gone. And I went to reach for my shelf, for it on my shelf, and I'm just like, oh,
You're
I
like,
got rid of,
no,
I got rid of
no.
that. And then I was
Yeah.
just like, oh man. So lesson learned.
Yeah. 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 I've heard that story many times from different people. I actually had
We have a club. It's the
right.
it's
Yeah.
the Physical Media Losers Club.
I actually had Vinegar Syndrome. The Joe, he's the co-owner of Vinegar Syndrome, and Oscar. I had him on my show. I think mid last year, somewhere around there. And he talked. I let him go because he talked in detail. He went in deep about how restoring a film is actually done,
Hmm.
and I let him go because I myself was interested in that. And so yeah, it's a longer video than I usually do. It was about 2 hours and 30 minutes, and he just went on and on and on. But it's so fascinating how they take this dilapidated film that's Vinegar Syndrome, and then they turn it into a 4K quality movie,
Hmm.
and the work and the process that goes into it, and AI. Today, I think that anytime someone hears that AI was used to restore film, people have this knee-jerk reaction and they start freaking out, thinking, "Oh no, they ruined the movie.
Well,
What did they do?"
it's a catch-all. AI could be used to find film grain. It's
Right. Well, that's the thing.
film, bad things on the film.
Right. Right. And that's the thing too. Is like Joe pointed out that they use AI in their restoration work, and they said that they've used AI's been used for a little bit more than 10 years now, but no one's known about it.
Just to clarify, people, if you say AI, people think, a knee jerk, it's bad because
Mm-hmm.
we haven't clarified what that means. AI, AI is the thing that's robbing people of their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
It's making us less human. But the AI is also a thousand different things that could be used for that could be beneficial. And if we're talking about it in terms of what this context is now versus, you know, creating art and creating art and taking away an artist's job, that kind of thing, that's one
Yeah.
thing. But that's
Yeah.
not what we're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. 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 I mean, I think about it as back in the early 90s when Jurassic Park came out, when CG started to become more and more popular, everybody was kind of in the industry was freaking out, thinking that CG computer generated is going to take over their jobs as special effects artists. And a lot of movies, they started relying so heavily on CG, and then they started learning how to use it more as a tool than to make the movie. And that's what's happening here, is that if it's used as a tool to help stabilize the frame, to to make it look clean it up, make it look a little better, then there's nothing. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, well, as High Def Disc News is saying, he says, he or she, sorry, I don't know your gender. You need a human monitoring or specifying when the AI is used, and ultimately, the fundamental truth is that you could easily say at a certain point CG is AI because they're using intelligent computers to you click it, it does it. If you're doing, listen, I'll be raked over the coals, but if you do like a find and replace, arguably that's AI because that's the computer doing with an artificial intelligence. It's not a human looking in an entire document for every single time it says AI. If you do a find and replace when it says AI for human, you're still using AI, but you're a human overseeing that.
Right.
People just you gotta chill out as an audience, and not freak out when people say AI. You got to listen to the story. But we also live in a day and age where on social media, people will not read, they will not compare, they will not find out more, they will not weigh the source more often than not, and they'll be angry. And so that's to be expected.
Yeah. Now, what I don't agree with is if AI is taking the editor's job and they're just letting AI edit the film. That I don't agree with. But if it's used as a tool to help, then I think that's fine. But yeah, I mean, going back to physical media, and as you know, I've talked about this before, that I compare 4K to Blu-ray. I'm going to do a little shameless plug here because this is 7 just came out of 4K. And I was comparing the 4K to the Blu-ray, and I'm going to give a little preview, guys, of what the video is going to consist of, because the finale has a radical color timing shift between the 4K and the Blu-ray, as you can see there. So the Blu-ray has that blue sky, cooler colors, and then the 4K has that more, harsh sun-baked colors. And so I was thinking to myself, well, wait a minute. What happened there? Did they just change the color timing specifically for the 4K? Is it something David Fincher wanted to change, or did it look like that? And so I did research on it. I even went so far as buying the DVD to see how the DVD looked. And then I even went so far as Googling pictures of the Mojave Desert in that area that people took at dusk and sunset. And I put them together. And as you can see, like the Google pictures there, it looks very similar to how the 4K and the DVD looks compared to the Blu-ray. So it that tells me that the 4K is accurate and the Blu-ray was inaccurate with the color timing.
Well, you're also talking about Fincher, and Fincher's listening to us right now. He's everywhere. He's all over his stuff. So I wouldn't doubt that at all. A quick tangent. And I'm sure they don't have a 4K for it, but if you ever look at John Badham's 1979 Dracula, the color timing on it is very, very frustrating because there's a whole story behind whether it should have been in black and white or color, and the sort of concessions that were made for the theatrical release versus the, at the time, VHS release. So even now on streaming or DVD, it's really kind of all over the map in terms of the color. Sometimes it's drained of all color. Sometimes the color is very rich, but it's a very inconsistent thing. And it's as a fan of that film, I always was very distracted by sometimes there was color, sometimes it was almost entirely black and white. And it was just the logic of the placement of all that stuff was really off. So it's kind of an interesting tale.
Yeah, I talked to Joe when he came on the channel about that. I asked him how, if there's a color timing issue, how do you know what's accurate, what was intended to be there theatrically and not, especially if you don't have a source material to really go by. And he said that he actually looks at VHS tapes, like rental VHS tapes, the DVD, and then they try to guesstimate as close as possible to what they were going for with the color timing. But yeah, that would definitely be an interesting. Because I don't think it's on 4K yet, but that would definitely be an interesting one to see how they accomplish that, what they
Hmm.
plan on doing. Um, but yeah, I mean, sometimes though, we also get like Michael Mann. He likes to not yeah, Michael Mann. Willem Freakin's what I'm thinking of.
Uh-huh.
Willem Freakin, he likes to change things. So like Live and Die in L.A. with the Blu-ray, he changed the color timing in that. That wasn't how people remembered in the theater. But then the 4K, they went back to the color timing of the theater of the
Hmm.
theatrical release. So sometimes that does happen where directors they're looking at like, oh well, hey, wait a minute, I can change some things here. Let's do this. And sometimes it's for the good, sometimes it's not. Um, but in the end, it's also what the director wants. It's his movie.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. Let's go through some of the comments here. High Disc News says Fincher seemed to have won it. Okay, yeah.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so he's just that's the same one. Some dislike it. I'm a fan. Okay, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, it depends on your taste too, and what you're used to. Because if you're used to exactly how a film looks on beta or VHS back when you were a kid, and you're used to that, and then all of a sudden it looks completely different to 4K, you think, well, wait a minute, this isn't accurate, or was it the VHS tape that wasn't accurate and the 4K is accurate? You just so I always like to do research on that first
For
before I do
me,
these.
ultimately, I'm less. I'm sometimes if it looks fine, it looks fine, even if they
Hmm.
changed it. Like for Dracula, that's something that I would be remembering.
Yeah.
The inconsistencies and the choices that were made. But for me, usually it's more the thing that sort of frustrates me or gets my attention if it's been changed is the aspect ratio,
Hmm.
and how that's presented. And oftentimes there's much more on the screen, and I'm not talking about pan and scan either.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'm watching something and I'm just like, I feel like something's really strangely cropped here.
Well,
You
what's
know,
interesting, going back to 7, the Blu-ray I found out was framed at 2.20, and the 4K is at 239, which is the intended ratio. Yeah, so sometimes that happens too, and I've been there too. I'm watching something like, something's a little off here. There should be more here. iDisc News says it's the director's work. They can change how it looks. George Lucas reminded us of that. Yeah, I mean, I tell people,
it belongs to us. It's not his.
yeah, it's ours, not us. I love seeing 178 fixed with true 185 matte. Yeah, I and then you get directors that do want to change things, like Fincher's another one where he wants to change some things using AI to make it a little bit more perfect than how it was originally shot. And so I try to remind people that Fincher is doing it subtly. He's not George Lucasing it. He's not changing the fundamental view of the movie.
Well, actually, I heard in the 4K that he didn't put Gwyneth Paltrow's head in the box. It was someone else's head.
It's someone else's head,
No, I'm kidding.
the producer's head. No. John Pimble says, if the production and or grading is transparent, it means it's working. Blue or orange sky, the end of 7 still works. Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I mean, in the end, it's the movie, not exactly the color scheme.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. But yeah, let's see. Absolutely true, Paul. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, I think we're going to wrap this up. And thanks so much for coming on and talking about In Search of
My pleasure.
Darkness, guys. Definitely, I'm going to leave the link in the description below after this is done, so anybody who wants to order it can go and order it. Use the link and
Yeah, I'll just say it verbally. You can go to 90shorrordoc.com, 90s, 90shorrordoc.com. Filmmaker.com. Flash sales going on for a couple more days, and you can get the In Search of Darkness 80s trilogy. You can get In Search of Darkness 90s. You can get Aliens Expanded. If you go to 80s sci-fi book.com, you could get the book on sale, the companion book, which is super cool. But ultimately, everyone's support is very much appreciated. You know, we're a small operation, and we put our blood, sweat, and tears in all of our products, and we want them to be the best that they can be. So, you know, whether you get it, whether you have it, or whether you're spreading the word, it's very much appreciated.
Yeah. I mean, you can tell you put a lot into these documentaries and a lot of love into the documentaries as well. That honestly you don't see too much of with, say, a major studio producing a documentary. And like I said, I've watched these more than a couple times, and they're just great. I love these documentaries and can't wait to see part 2 of the '90s In Search of Darkness.
Me too. I wonder how it's going to turn out.
Well, that's up to you. I mean, or is it up to the editor? We'll see. But yeah, guys, definitely check out that website and pick up those physical media copies of In Search of Darkness. Thanks so much for coming on, David, and we got to have you on again. And as always, guys, keep physical media alive, and we will see everyone next.